Coming up, Gus Malzahn asked a tough question about his team's injuries and a bold projection for Alabama. It's all on the way next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone, welcome to SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad you're with us. We'll talk about the SEC here for the next 60 minutes and sort of break down everything that's happening. We finally sort of build up to another collection of spring games here this weekend. We'll preview some of those as we kind of get rolling here for kind of a busy time of year in terms of the last dress rehearsal, so to speak, for the 2018 season for a lot of these SEC programs.
Yeah, some of the familiar names, a little bit of Nick Saban, a lot of Gus Malzahn, and some Jimbo Fisher peeking in it sometimes.
Speaking of Gus Malzahn, let's start with him here for item number 1 on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. You know it's been a tough spring for Auburn when it comes to injuries.
Yeah.
Will Hastings' injury, Eli Stove's injury, Caleb Kim, I guess, going to miss the rest of spring practice here. You've had a number of injuries that Auburn has dealt with here over the last couple of weeks. And now people are starting to wonder, hey, what gives? What's going on with this? When Malzahn met with the media a couple of days ago, one reporter asked a pretty pointed question about, is there something that your staff is doing that's sort of maybe contributing to this problem here this spring? Listen to the question and then Malzahn's somewhat interesting answer. Here it is.
To the layman, when people see all these injuries in the spring and some injuries in the past during the season, especially at key spots and starters, people wonder about the strength and conditioning program. It's kind of explained. I mean, do you think that your strength and conditioning program is helping these guys?
Yeah, our strength and conditioning program is one of the best in the country. And then really last year, we stayed really healthy for the most part without just a couple minor things. And so I feel very good about that. You know, this spring, you're talking about the injuries, you know, both of those were really fluke deals. And if you look back at, I guess since we've been here five years or whatever, maybe this is the sixth spring, but we've had very few season-ending injuries in the spring. You know, probably count them on one hand. So, you know, Russell is the best. There's no doubt about that. And, you know, there's fine lines. I mean, you got to practice. But when fluke things happen, that's just part of the game. And so what you got to do is you got to get other guys ready. And on the flip side of that is you're going to get other guys ready. They're going to get the reps in the spring, and hopefully we'll get those other guys back.
Look, speaking from the perspective of a Georgia fan, I'd like nothing more than to criticize
Right.
Auburn for something. And as sort of like a media talk show blowhard, I'd love nothing more than to sort of spin up some sort of controversy here on a Tuesday. But this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in terms of, is the strength and conditioning program to blame for why Auburn might be losing games, or I shouldn't say losing games, losing players to injury here. I'm always amazed at the mainstream's media's ability to be sort of fooled by randomness,
right, yeah.
and realize that just because two events happen doesn't mean they're connected and that some sort of narrative forms out of that. This seems to me to be an example of that.
Well, I definitely, listen, I agree with you. I don't think the strength and conditioning program at Auburn has anything to do with these specific injuries. But there is an avenue for the strength and conditioning program at certain universities to have that kind of toll. I mean,
You think so?
you have to do.
You would know, you played. But
You have to do a certain amount of preventative maintenance. You have to do certain lifts that give you stabilities in the knees, in the groin, in the hips, in the ankles. It comes along with the territory. You don't want all your players doing free weights. You want all your players doing free weights. You don't want everybody on machines where you're not getting the stability, getting the core, and then they go out there and have to react and run. You want these guys lifting free weights. That's why you never see the leg press as much as you do the back squats. And yes, back squats on a machine are a lot safer. But if you're doing them in a free weight rack, then all of a sudden you get the core stability and you get the muscle stability.
But hold on, because I'm honestly interested in your opinion on this. Aren't you talking about getting hurt lifting weights, that leg presses are a good way to get hurt lifting weights? You think that certain weight room activity makes you more likely to get hurt on the field?
Yes, absolutely. That's 100% fact. If you're doing leg presses on a machine and you're not building the little small stabilizing muscles in your knees. Well, you know, like you ever get in a squat rack, and I don't know when's the last time you did squats, but you go down, your knees start shaking.
You know what, don't be such a jerk. How about that? How about we start the show with me just saying, don't be such a jerk?
You know what I'm saying, though? Your knees, you go down, your knees start shaking. You build that stabilization up in your knees, in your core, throughout your body by doing free weights. That's why you don't see players locked into just leg press machines or just some kind of pulley machine. You like to do the free weights. That's what builds it up. Now, I don't think, with all that being said, I don't think this has anything to do with Auburn's strength and conditioning program.
Yeah.
I think that this guy's been there 7 of the last 8 seasons. I can't recall his name right now. Been there 7 of the last 8 seasons. Auburn has had a ton of tough luck injuries over the last few years, but none of them have been like, boy, his knee's not stable. A lot of these are contact injuries. There's some broken bones in there. It's not something that I think that I would point to the weight room and say, boy, why aren't you doing this lift instead of that lift?
Yeah, I mean, for me, you hear the opposite about Georgia, where Georgia was incredibly healthy last season. And Scott Sinclair, Georgia's strength and conditioning coach, was praised for the work that he had done to help keep Georgia healthy and on the field. I think that's a bunch of bunk, the way that I think this is a bunch of bunk. I think that random occurrences are going to happen. Over the course of 1 year, you are going to have an unusually healthy team, and you'll probably play well because of it. In another year, I'm talking about any SEC team, is sort of going to have an unusually unhealthy team. A lot of injuries that happen right there at together in a bunch. But with 85 guys on their scholarship, that's going to happen from time to time. Just because something happens doesn't mean there's some sort of meaning behind it.
Right.
These injuries occurred. Well, why did they occur? Sometimes there is no why. And sometimes I think in college football, we get ourselves in trouble when we say events that happen, we have to determine why they happen. Sometimes when you have big guys colliding into each other, some weird stuff's just going to go on, and there really isn't much reason or understanding behind it.
No, I completely agree with you, and that's why I'm trying to explain that this is not something that I think is happening at Auburn right now. But when you go back to any strength coach knows this. When you're just doing, if you're locked into say a bench press machine, and you're just going like this, back and forth, and then all of a sudden you get hit with a guy, or you have to punch as an offensive lineman, and it's up here, it's down here. You have to react in certain ways. You're just waiting for a torn pec. I mean, you're reacting in different ways. You don't have the stabilization muscles in your shoulder, so it can happen. Do I think this specific amount of injuries to Nick Brom and Will Hastings, do I think that has anything to do with what they're doing in the strength room right now? I don't think so at all. But it definitely, if the trend continued for the next 2 to 3 years and the injuries start mounting in that direction, it's the same injury, then you would look at what's going on.
Austin Moore on Facebook says, do we really expect any coach that's asked this type of question to respond by saying, yep, that's it, it's our strength and conditioning program, it's not up to par here? I guess to a certain extent that is a fair question, that if it was an issue, it's not like Malzahn's going to admit that right there. But I guess my question back to you is, what is the definition of a good strength and conditioning program? And at Florida right now, they're talking about how much better looking the players are, a little more, visually fit, compared to what it was at the end of the Jim McElwain era. I mean, what is the hallmark of good strength and conditioning? Is it good offensive and defensive lines? Is it looking at guys that just look good in their uniform? How do you know good strength and conditioning when you see it?
Well, I think when you talk about college football, you talk about strength and conditioning coaches that coach accountability, specifically in the weight room. Because, I've been in some of these programs where, listen, you get your workout and you're there in like the middle of June and they say, hey guys, go get your 5 sets of 10 on the bench this way, or go get 3 sets of back squats this direction. And they kind of look the other way. And maybe you don't have a number of coaches looking at you. And so you have to talk about accountability. Who's sitting there watching you? Who's going to make sure you get this lift in? Is somebody going over your maxes to make sure they're getting the most potential out of you so that the next day you're climbing up in weight at different exercises? That happens all over the SEC, but some guys fall a little bit short of it.
Dietrich Frazier in our comment section says this is what people also said about Tennessee, and he's referencing Butch Jones there. And what's kind of funny is Jones was a coach that was not liked. The media had some skepticism about him. He wasn't popular with fans. So therefore, you say something like this about Butch Jones' Tennessee team, it sort of sticks to him because people are looking for a reason to dislike him. But Gus Malzahn just won the SEC West. Gus Malzahn is coming off another pretty elite recruiting class. This is not going to stick to Malzahn in the same way because Malzahn's a guy that Auburn fans have decided that they like, and the media doesn't really have a whole lot of motivation to sort of tear down right now. So you can ask the question, you can make the statement, fans can debate this on message boards, but for the most part, this is not going to stick to Malzahn because he's a popular coach.
Yeah.
For an unpopular coach, he has to defend his injuries. Malzahn's too popular to have to defend this.
Well, and this is it's a 3-part kind of answer. Listen, it's not only how the injury occurs, but you also have the training staff to be able to get these guys back on the field in a timely fashion. You don't want this training staffs of the past where, listen, let's sit out a year for an ACL injury. It's just not happening anymore. Let's push the envelope. Let's see what you feel comfortable with. Let's see how quickly you can get back on the field. Can you get back to game speed? And That goes to coaching, that goes to the strength and conditioning staff, and it goes to the training staff as well. It's got to be all three kind of coexisting with each other.
Bo Molinari says the hallmark of good strength and conditioning is your team's healthy at the end of the season. I think sometimes that's luck. Luck is something that exists, and you have to either plan for it or plan to have it sort of work against you in college football, and this may be an example where that's true. I will say, though, you do hear about this in the NBA sometimes, where certain organizations are a little bit more forward-thinking than others, and they do have better injury recovery. And, you know, in a league like that where you're playing 82 nights, you got a lot of back issues, a lot of foot issues. I think there are probably some teams in a league like that that are able to handle injuries and recovery better than others. But in college football, I'm not quite so sure.
Yeah, listen, I understand what you're saying. Can you get to the end of the year? But to me, I'm talking about getting to the end of games. I want to see the 60-minute games. Can you get to the end of games? Because that's when the injuries happen. That's what people don't understand. That's a lot of times when you have the non-contact injury, specifically for big men up front. It's, are you tired? Because when you're not tired, listen, you know where your feet are, you know where your hands are. You're able to go and you can do the repetitive motion. When you get tired and all of a sudden you're reacting and your foot slips this way and your hand's going this way and you're lunging at people and you're out of breath, that's when a lot of injuries can occur too.
On YouTube, Joe Self says stretching proper is super important as well, and I would probably agree with that also. Let me move on to item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list, and something I found to be pretty fascinating. So CBS Sports quoted one of the online sports books with some college football playoff odds, but it's not just odds to make the playoff. You could also bet against a team making the playoffs. Right. Not every team in college football, but just the top teams that are in there. You had odds on and odds against. I know sometimes the betting odds can be a little bit hard to understand, but minus is a favorite, plus is an underdog. It's all in relationship to what you'd win if you bet $100. And right now, according to the online sports book that CBS Sports quoted here, Alabama is more likely to make the playoff in 2018 than they are to miss the playoff in 2018. They are minus 220 to make the playoff. And once again, what that means is that they are a favorite to do so. That if you bet $220 on Alabama making the playoff, you'd only get $100 back at this one sports book. They're plus 175 to miss, meaning if you bet Alabama at $100 not to make the playoff, you could win $175 back if they don't. Is it more likely that Alabama is in the playoff than not?
Listen, I tried to take, when I saw this topic, I tried to take the crimson goggles off. And I try to, you guys know me, I try to think through a lot of these things. I'm going to tell you if I don't agree with it. Here's what I came up with, though. If you say 4 teams make the playoff, right? Yeah. If you would give me Alabama and you could pick any other 3 teams that in college football, any other 3 teams, I'm going with Alabama.
Really?
I'm going with Alabama. You can pick Ohio State, you can pick USC, you can pick Georgia, pick whoever you want to. But year in and year out, Alabama has proven that they're going to get back to the playoff. They've been in every single playoff so far. It's so hard for teams around college football to be good year in and year out. Except for Nick Saban, so far he's the one that's been proven that he can get there year in and year out no matter what happens.
So I don't think it's an unreasonable point, but I mean, you do have Clemson now that's been in 3 straight playoffs. Yeah. You do have Ohio State that's been in multiple playoffs. You do have Georgia that was in the playoff a year ago. I mean, that's 3 right there that if you give me one of those 3 teams making the playoff from that group, I think it's more likely than Alabama just by itself. And I mean, that's my issue. It's not that Alabama can't make the playoff. Right. It's this idea of Alabama's more likely to make the playoff than not. That's giving them a favorite status that I'm not quite so sure is earned here. Arguably the number 1 team in the country preseason, plenty of case to be made for that. It's a whole nother conversation to say that based on the rest of the country, the field, that they are a better bet against and it's not just 3 teams at this point in time.
No, I know.
You're essentially taking all the teams in one bucket together, that Alabama's a better bet than the rest of the country combined. That's giving too much respect to Alabama, and dare I say, at the expense of a Georgia team that I do think is going to be better than a lot of the national media, maybe the betting public as represented here, may give them credit for. I mean, if Alabama and Georgia were to play together again in December, Alabama's not a huge favorite in that game.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's going to be definitely something. Listen, we're going to cross that bridge a million times between now and then, now in December. I'm just saying that it's not so much that I'm saying who wins between Alabama and Georgia, or who. I'm just saying from April right now, what is it, April 3rd, looking at it, looking ahead, if you're giving me Alabama against, and you can pick any 3 other teams, and by the way, it's Masters weekend, so a lot of people are doing these pools. You pick 3 golfers. If you're giving me 3 and 2, and I understand what you're saying about Clemson. I completely agree with that, because I'm not sure who in the ACC really is going to contend with them. I'm not sure what Miami is this year. Florida State.
Great defensive line returning. Probably going to have a freshman quarterback, but he's probably going to be really, really good.
But here's what I fall back to. Alabama just beat Clemson in the Sugar Bowl handily against a great defensive line, when I'm not sure their offensive line was better last year than it will be this year. They did just beat Georgia. It was a double overtime game, but they did just beat Georgia. And so I keep falling back to that, to where if I'm giving you 3 teams and you're giving me Alabama, I feel more comfortable taking Alabama.
Judah Alexander says that Alabama, this is on YouTube, he says Alabama has separated itself from the rest of the SEC. They are certainly, the top team in the league right now by virtue of being defending national champion, but let's slow down on have separated themselves. They lost to an SEC team last year in Auburn. As you said, it was a close game against Georgia. My prediction would be if those 2 teams were to play in December, neutral side, Alabama's no more than a field goal favorite in that game. And that's not a whole lot of separation to then build a more likely to make the playoff than not case on that they're going to have to win a razor-thin field goal type game against Georgia.
Well, the only thing I keep falling back to on this, and like I said, we're going to have this talk a million times, is that Georgia did it, and Georgia was an incredible team last year. But I think the reason they keep getting questions because of all the talent they lost at the top, and Kirby Smart still was 8-5 in year 1. So it's not so much about this year's team. It's about the fact that Nick Saban has proven year in and year out that he can get a team to that level. No matter how many people leave, no matter how many freshmen are on his team, he's proven he can get teams back to that level. Now I'm with you. Now I think it's a field goal game if these teams match up in December and if they both run the gauntlet of the SEC and get there. But right now, as of as of April 3rd, I'm still feeling better about Alabama against any of the 3.
Now, you mentioned Nick Saban. Of course, Saban, when he hears all this kind of stuff, and I know he watches SEC Country Live every afternoon, when he hears all this stuff, there's one reminder that he wants to give that, you know what, he doesn't like any of this kind of talk. Do you remember when he said this?
I'm trying to get our players to listen to me instead of listening to you guys. All that stuff you write about how good we are and all that stuff they hear on ESPN, it's like poison. You know what I mean? It's like taking poison, like rat poison. All right, so I'm asking them, are you going to listen to me or are you going to listen to these guys about how good you are?
So is it going to be a rat poison-like offseason for Nick Saban in Alabama then?
Listen, he battles that every year. And I honestly know that what you're saying is that you think some national pundits do sleep on what Georgia can be this year, and I agree with you. I look at some of these people that, Georgia, question this and that, because I agree with you. I think Georgia's going to be right there, and I think that we're headed towards the Georgia-Alabama SEC championship game that becomes an incredible game, much like the games I played in against Florida in 2008 and 2009. But this is something that Nick Saban's learned to battle with, and I do think it is a rat poison type thing because they are the defending national champions. At some point, I expect Tua to be named the starter. Jalen can get some snaps too. Their offensive line is going to be great. They have to replace a bunch in the secondary, but Nick Saban's shown he can do that.
All right, item number 3 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. A busy weekend for Tennessee. A lot of famous players welcome back to the program. Alvin Kamara, the NFL's Offensive Rookie of the Year from the New Orleans Saints, stopped by his old stomping grounds in college to sort of take in what new coach Jeremy Pruitt is doing. And when Pruitt met with the media after the practice was over, he said having guys like Kamara back around the program is exactly what Tennessee needs. Here is Pruitt on that subject.
Well, I think it's good for the program to get everybody back. And Tennessee is a football program that has a lot of pride, and it's had a lot of pride for a long, long time. It's like I tell the guys, they were playing football here long before we were born, and they're going to be playing football here long after we're gone. It's our job to leave it better than we found it, and we're going to take a lot of pride in doing that. So there's been a lot of men over the years that have worked very hard to build this program up, and I get it, and I want these guys to come back. I know that there's a sense of pride when they come back, and I think they like what they see from our guys. Our guys are working hard. So I want as many former VFLs back as we can get. It's going to take all of us to get this program back to where it's supposed to be, and I think everybody's willing to do that.
Teresa Stewart in our Facebook comment section is a big Tennessee fan. She likes welcoming guys like Alvin Kamara back to the program. Jason Hoffer takes a little bit of a shot at Butch Jones, who didn't use Kamara probably effectively in his final season. One of the reasons why Butch Jones is making $35,000 at Alabama right now. But a couple points I want to bring up on this point. But first of all, on this is almost a carbon copy of what virtually every SEC coach says. Yeah, we got to welcome these former guys back to the program. I'll always think of, even outside the SEC, Bob Stoops. One of the first big changes he made at Oklahoma was to welcome back the old Barry Switzer era Oklahoma players that had been somewhat shunned coming off of some of the NCAA issues that Oklahoma have happened there back in the 80s. What is it about former players being back that's sort of universally appreciated by coaches like Jeremy Pruitt? Because so many coaches sort of echo a similar sentiment to this.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible resource, first and foremost. I mean, when I was a freshman in college, it was D'Amico Ryans, it was Brody Croyle, it was Roman Harper, it was all these guys that were moving on to the NFL. And having guys like that come back, it not only is a great resource, by the way, I think D'Amico Ryan's endowed a scholarship in his name at Alabama, but you get a tie to the past. You get a tie if you're Jeremy Pruitt to look back and say, hey, these guys have been through this program, have been where you are, and they've headed on to the next level. It's the same thing when you're in around high school programs that have that kind of development. You know, they say, hey, you know what? We sent 3 guys to Division I last year. Those guys come back, they talk to the players, you understand what it takes, and you also understand that your path can get you there. And I think that, listen, Alvin Kamara is not a great example of this, but if you're Jeremy Pruitt and you can tie back to Peyton Manning, some of the other guys that were in and around that program for so long that were great players, that's the first thing I'm trying to do if I'm Jeremy Pruitt, is trying to remind Tennessee people that, hey, this is a nationally prominent program.
Yeah.
This is a proud, proud program.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I love what you said there, and you heard that from Pruitt himself in the comments a moment ago. Tennessee's a program with a lot of pride. You referenced that as well. It almost seems like, and this is going to come across as a shot at Tennessee, and I don't mean for it to be that way. I hope Vols fans hear this as what it is, sort of a defense of the program. But it almost seems like the stature of the Tennessee program has been diminished somewhat in recent years.
Yeah.
A bad coach like Derek Dooley will do that. An overmatched coach like Butch Jones will do that. It's almost become very easy to forget how larger than life this Tennessee program used to seem. I mean, there was a time when Neyland Stadium was 100,000 people, at a time when most college stadiums didn't even have 90.
Yeah.
You know, the Rocky Top that plays all the time was sort of a badge of honor of, hey, this is how proud we are of Tennessee football. It was General Neyland. It was a million guys going to the NFL. The whole program is just sort of made to feel smaller in recent years, so much so that it's become the kind of program almost like an Oklahoma State that's really little more than just the plaything of a very rich billionaire like the Cleveland Browns owner. Yeah, well, T. Boone would be the guy at Oklahoma State. The Browns owner, Jimmy Haslam, doing that for Tennessee. It almost seems like the program's stature has been diminished somewhat. I think one of the big jobs for Jeremy Pruitt is to have some of that big, prideful talk return. Hey, this is who Tennessee football is. It's what they call the VFLs, the Vols for Life, like Alvin Kamara, and the other guys have gone to the NFL. Pruitt's got to restore some of that pride. That's not an easy thing to do. But that's a really important job for Pruitt here at Tennessee, I believe.
No, I completely agree. And Cliff Nelson says on the YouTube comment section, it said UT is just one good season away from getting right back in the big time. And that's an LSU fan, and Cliff Nelson saying that. And I agree with that. And it's just tough if you're Jeremy Pruitt. You try to remind a lot of people, and it's not just the players. You're not just bringing them back into the fold. These pictures are being posted. These pictures are being talked about. They're all over Twitter. You're talking to recruits. You're talking to the fan base saying, listen, let's bring back Eric Berry. Let's bring back Dan Williams. Let's bring back Derek Barnett. Let's remind people that this is a special program that is always sending elite level talent to the next level. We just have to see if we can develop that next level tier of guys within this program to make sure we can win games throughout the season. And Jeremy Pruitt has seen it happen at a few different programs now, and he's smart to try to bring that in.
Over on the YouTube comment section, Hardwired to Self-Destruction, bringing up Florida, and that's an important name to bring up in a conversation like this as well, because really Dan Mullen's trying to do some of that same kind of stuff too, and we'll see more from Dan Mullen a little bit later on the show here today. But there is that sense of, hey, reminding people this is Florida. You know, you can forget. I mean, reputations are built over the course of decades, but they're sort of destroyed in a matter of minutes at times. And the Florida reputation has really been diminished. The Tennessee reputation has really been diminished. There is a bit of a race here between brand new coach Jeremy Pruitt and new to Florida coach Dan Mullen to see who can restore the heritage of these two former great programs first.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what's interesting to look at and compare the two teams is this. And Cliff just said it best. Tennessee is one good season away from being nationally relevant in a big way again, because people know that name Tennessee. You know, they know when Tennessee pops up and they're inside the top 10, they're a great program. Good offensive line, good defensive line, great safety play, good quarterbacks for the most part throughout history. I feel the same way about Florida, but I think Florida, with the cabinet they have, with the one deep, and I've talked about that a couple of times, I think with the one deep that Florida has right now, they're closer to that one season. You know what I'm saying? I feel like Florida's closer to that one season. Jeremy Pruitt, to me, has a little bit longer of a job because he doesn't have that one deep yet, especially not on the offensive line, probably not on the defensive line. When you look at the injuries and the toll it's taken, people leaving the program, it just hasn't been there in order for me to think that Jeremy Pruitt's one season to get them back to relevance is going to be this year.
Over on the Facebook comment section, Dwayne Rourke, who's a Arkansas fan, is mad at us for talking Tennessee. We're going to talk some Hogs later on the program. Bull Molinari, who's a Texas A&M fan, he's also mad that we're talking about Tennessee. You know what? We're going to talk about his team, the Aggies, right now. It's item number 4 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I thought that Jimbo Fisher, the new Texas A&M coach, had some interesting things to say about what they've been doing at Texas A&M spring practice. focusing in on a lot of situational type stuff, end of game stuff, short yardage stuff, goal line type stuff. And Jimbo explained this has always been a big part of his coaching mantra because it gives his teams, used to be Florida State, Texas A&M now, a chance to steal some games late. Here is how Jimbo Fisher explained that.
You got to prepare them. You got to put them in last plays of the game, last situations of the game, from the 5-yard line, 3-yard line, 10-yard line, 15-yard line, 18-yard line. Minute 32 timeouts, 40 seconds no timeouts. You're trying to get a field goal, trying to get a touchdown. 2 minutes before the half. How you come out the second half. I mean, all those you got to get them to think those situations. How you can, as I say, steal ball games or steal momentum. You know what I'm saying?
I can't help but when you hear Jimbo Fisher speak that way, think back to a game last year in which Texas A&M allowed it to be stolen from them.
Oh, man.
UCLA to start the season. I'm not telling you that I was at every Texas A&M practice and that I know that Kevin Sumlin was not a great and attention to detail coach, but my assumption is Jimbo Fisher is going to be better. He's won a national championship. He's overall had more success, and I would imagine A&M fans like the idea of Fisher trying to obviously win his share of easy games, but also steal his share of close games as well. I guess Aggies fans probably like that from him.
The final 2 minutes of each half is such a big component. When you look at, and I'm not just talking about for football guys or coaches or old school coaches or a quarterback that can run a 2-minute drill. I'm talking about go look at like turnover margins in the last 2 minutes. Go look at guys who have stolen games, every year in the NFL. And listen, when I was with the Falcons and Matt Ryan's a quarterback, he's like leading the league since he came in these 2-minute comeback. And it's because we practice 2-minute drill just as much as we practice like regular from line of scrimmage type plays. I mean, it was 2-minute drill at all times. You had the wide receivers running. You're working on these plays. You have different packages. You have different signals. He's so good at it because you practice it. And the Falcons, for that reason, under Matt Ryan, have stolen a ton of games. It's not a knock to say that you're stealing a game. I think Florida-Kentucky last year for Florida fans, a perfect example. Kentucky should have never, ever lost that game. They're up by 13 points with like 10 minutes left in the game. They don't cover a couple of wide receivers, and Florida comes back and wins by 1 point.
Yeah.
That's a stolen game. And that's not to say that Jim McElwain was any better than Kentucky was last year at those last 2-minute situations, but you can lose the game in the final 2 minutes. Jimbo Fisher is trying to steer away from doing that.
So, I mean, anytime you have a new coach in place, there's going to be a certain restoration job that has to go on. I just mentioned for Tennessee and Florida, it's sort of a restoring of pride. Texas A&M admittedly doesn't have the same kind of history that Florida and Tennessee do. They're both national championship programs within the modern era. Tennessee in the BCS era. Florida a couple times has hoisted national championship trophies. So the job for Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, is less about restoring pride. It's more about restoring confidence. I got to imagine that Texas A&M players just lost confidence recently, given the fact they did have the game slip away against UCLA. And it did seem like they were losing ground in the SEC West. This notion of we're going to be strong end of the game, we're going to be sharp when decisions are at their most crucial, I'm not quite sure how manageable that is. I think some of that is somewhat luck-based over time. But I think you like the idea that Jimbo Fisher wants to really stay attuned to those small details.
Yeah, and as hard as it is, I mean, I think this is tougher for Jimbo Fisher because I think this type of game plan and talking about late games and talking about 2-minute drills, I think it's directly tied in to your front seven and your secondary. I mean, I think it's 100% directly tied in. Do you have that corner that can go out there and lock down? And it's not just one guy. It's not just somebody rushing off the edge. It's not just a lockdown corner. It's not just a good linebacker. It's got to be all 11 on defense in these situations. You have to have 6 defensive backs that can get out there and cover all these wide receivers going different directions. It's not something Texas A&M has had. They have not had a dominant defense, since they've been in the SEC, and that's what Jimbo Fisher's trying to get back.
And plus, for Jimbo Fisher, if he's coaching for a team now that's stealing games, it's a big upgrade over at Florida State, where he had players stealing crab legs.
Yeah. I was not sure which way you were going with that. Yeah, crab legs are running 2-minute drills for Jameis Winston for sure.
Jamie Blanton says Jimbo inherited greatness at Florida State. He's a fraud. No wonder he's talking about, quote, stealing games. Nothing to worry about in the SEC. That is not fair to Jimbo Fisher. It is amazing how people don't like Fisher. Jamie's comment included here. Jimbo Fisher did not inherit greatness at Florida State. Bobby Bowden, with all due respect, an all-time great coach. Not at the end.
Yeah,
not at the end. That is so unfair. Now, I love Jamie getting the comment section started up there. That's just a wrong comment. That's
no, it
wrong.
is. Listen, Jimbo Fisher brought Florida State back. I mean, for everything I love about Bobby Bowden, and listen, I've met Bobby Bowden. I was starstruck when I met him, but that program was tailing off in a big way by the time Bobby Bowden left. Jimbo Fisher got them back to that level. And it's not just on the field, the recruiting level got back to where
this is a dated reference, but go see Tony Bennett in concert. He ain't singing "I Left My Heart in San Francisco" anymore. There's a little bit of the same thing going on with Bobby Bowden there at the end. That is not the same guy who was doing it in '93.
Right,
not the same guy at all.
And we talked about Bobby Bowden the other day in this Florida State program. It's like, at what point does the coaching turnover? Are you still well loved? I mean, some of these coaches. I think it came up with Philip Fulmer the other day. It's like, listen, these guys were great, and you remember great things about it. You remember Philip Fulmer's national championship. But let's not forget the guy was asked to leave Tennessee. I mean, it's not like he rode out on shoulders off the field. This guy was asked to leave Tennessee.
Stephen Early says Bobby Bowden pulled a Steve Spurrier. Tanked a program, rolled out when it slipped out of his grasp. It's a little bit different, though, in the fact that Steve Spurrier never cared a rip about South Carolina. He just wanted somewhere to coach. Whereas Bobby Bowden dearly loved Florida State. He was also trying to hold on so he could be the winningest coach of all time. Remember, he had that feud going on with Joe Paterno. This is one of those things where I just don't think anybody had the political power to tell Bobby Bowden to step down at Florida State. That, to me, is more about what that was.
And it was a trivial decision. I mean, we're not going to get off on Florida State football. It was a trivial decision when it was made. I mean, if you go back to when they kind of asked Bobby Bowden to leave, it was like, boy, not only are you going to ask me to leave, but you're going to hire my offensive coordinator as the head coach to replace me when I leave this place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Rick Keene says Jimbo coached in the ACC when it was at its weakest. He left because the ACC is getting better and the writing's on the wall. Rick, I can't let this comment go unchallenged either. It's another Florida fan forgetting the fact that for the last half-decade, Florida hasn't beaten Florida State.
Well, no, it's not even that. But if you're going to leave, don't tell me you're going to leave the ACC because it's getting tough, and then you're going to go to the SEC West. I mean, that's not the move you're going to make. You're not going to say, boy, this conference by Petrino is really killing it right now. Let me head over and face off against Alabama and LSU and Auburn every year, and that'll be easier.
I think it's really interesting. Jimbo's already got some.
He's not liked.
He's got his haters, and if you're an A&M fan, that's at least one step in the right direction. You've got a coach who's going to get noticed far more than I think Kevin Sumlin was. Let's do item number 5 here on our SEC Country Life First and 10 list. Very interesting comment from Charles Davis from the NFL Network, and I think this really is going to be interesting for you because you obviously sort of lived through this.
Yep.
Charles is mostly referencing defensive side of the ball here, but nonetheless, he says the hallmark of the Nick Saban teams are how well coached they are, how well they know how to handle practice, but there's potentially one downside to all of that. Here is Davis, the NFL Network analyst, on with our Ryan Fowler as a part of our Alabama podcast every day at SECCountry.com. If you're an Alabama fan, listen to the compliment that Davis gives that, in a way, kind of doesn't sound like a compliment. Take a listen to this.
They get a lot of points for understanding how to practice at a high tempo, how to absorb information because they get a lot thrown at them both sides of the ball at Alabama. You come out of there on defense with a PhD if you're a signal caller, whether you're a safety or a linebacker, because of pressure they put on you to understand checks and all of that. The flip side of it is I have had more than one NFL scout say to me, when you judge an Alabama kid, you sometimes have to take away the ceiling. And it's really a compliment, although a lot of people don't take it that way. They do such a great job of not just identifying talent and recruiting, which we know they do a fantastic job of. They also coach the heck out of these kids. These kids get better during their time at Alabama, and some scouts feel like they almost max out, that there's not much left to get, that what you see is what you get, and that's a pretty good product. But I don't know how many more jumps are left because they've been coached so well. It sounds like it's not a compliment. It actually is.
I'm going to tell you right now, I hate the NFL draft. I don't dislike Charles Davis, but this kind of analysis is what makes me hate the NFL draft. Oh, you can't take an Alabama player because there's no ceiling. You can't improve upon them with your superior coaching because they've already had good coaching from Nick Saban. I got news for you. Nick Saban's not the only college coach that coaches circles around half the guys in the NFL. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you to throw anybody under the bus, but I imagine you might be able to attest to that in some form or fashion. But on its substance, how interesting do you find this statement that Saban's staff prepares guys for the NFL, but some coaches are a little bit intimidated by the fact that there may not be another ceiling, another gear for these players to go to?
This is tough for me because it almost breaks in not even a 2-part question, but a 3-part question, because I can't just say, boy, I agree with him, or boy, I don't, because I've lived this before. And he's got a point. I think he goes a little bit farther than I would, but I don't think you just take away the ceiling and say, boy, these guys are going to be as good as they can possibly be, because there's still so much knowledge to gain. There's still so much experience to get around NFL players, NFL coaches. But what you have to understand is these guys that have been in Alabama system, that have gone through this process, They understand exactly what is being asked of them in Alabama. Boy, you know, in this coverage right now, I have to get inside leverage. I have to make sure this guy's outside releasing. I know where my secondary is. I know where these Alabama players can nitpick every small thing. And if you're an NFL GM, you better be damn sure that your coaches are on that level with what was being asked of them in Alabama. That's why Bama players go to Bill Belichick. They have a ton of success. They go to some of these good programs, and they do well. But if those little brackets are not around, I'm not talking about the Julio Joneses of the world. He's a freak. He would be good anywhere. But I'm talking about some of these, you know, 5th, 6th round picks that get at the back end of the draft. If you don't have these brackets around, their nutrition's as good as it's ever going to be. You know, their competitiveness as good as it's ever going to be. Their strength and conditioning as good as it's ever going to be. So you have to be sure that you have the right coaching staff around these guys if you think you're going to get the same product out of them.
What Charles Davis says here, though, what it reminds me of is, and he's not saying this, but it reminds me of that criticism you hear sometimes of, well, the Alabama players are used up by the time they get to the NFL because they've been pushed so hard at Alabama. Or the Alabama defensive players are system players. That guy's had great success in college because of the system he plays in. The issue here is Alabama puts so many players in the NFL, you can grab yourself a handful of players and sort of form any narrative you want to. You can pick Trent Richardson and say, hey, you know what, look at this guy. He was used up by the time he got to the NFL. Or you can pick defensive guy that didn't exactly pan out and say, you know what, this guy was just a system player in college. Most college teams won't suffer that same kind of criticism because there's not as big of a pool to pull from, whereas Alabama kind of does here. So, you know, what Charles Davis says I find endlessly interesting, but I'm not really quite sure it's as substantive as maybe he thinks that it is.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying is I can agree with Charles Davis to a certain extent. I'm not going to look at it and say, boy, these guys are beat up on the way out of this program, or boy, you know, this is happening, this is happening. Because you're right. Listen, for every Trent Richardson there is coming to Alabama, there's a C.J. Mosley. For every Rolando McClain, there's a Dante Hightower. There's a Dre Kirkpatrick. There's a, you know, and Andre Smith got a bag of rap. That guy's been in the league now, you know, 8-9 years himself. And so, you're right. Alabama players get this rap of when you leave, boy, you know, the next level is going to be challenging for them. And it is. Listen, it was challenging for me, too. I had to make that transition myself. It took me probably the better part of my rookie year in the NFL before I thought, you know what? I'm not getting as much help as I did back at Alabama. This is not Scott Cochran saying, hey, where are you at? Make sure we're getting this hour-long workout in. You're on your own. And so there is some transition time, but there has been a ton of players from Alabama that have been very good NFL players.
I don't want to turn this into a bash the NFL session, but it's part of the reason why I just can't stomach this league from time to time, because the whole draft conversation ends up being about how much smarter NFL is than college, and how, you know, a guy like Lamar Jackson can't play quarterback in the NFL because he won't understand the complicated offenses. He played in a dumbed-down college system. But I mean, you've seen what, you know, Bob Petrino's doing, and you know guys like that. Compared to most NFL offenses, I'm not quite so sure how dumbed down that really was. Or, well, you know, I'm going to take this talent and I'm going to sort of build it into something more superior.
Yeah.
You know, the level of arrogance that the average NFL either scouting guy has, coach has, analyst who pretends to be a scouting guy, the level of arrogance that sort of gets baked into the cake with every NFL conversation, I just find to be insufferable.
No, I agree with you. And listen, I've been in those circles. I've been through those meetings. I've met with the scouts. I've hung out with the scouts. I've met with a lot of those guys in the front office. I know a lot of them personally. They sit there on TV and they kind of scratch their chin and they have their clipboard and they kind of lean back and you see them at pro days. It's a copycat league, man. It really is. It's a copycat league. Boy, that guy, you know what? He was a scout up in New England. Let's bring him on board. And it just doesn't always work that way. I'm telling you right now, for the coaches I was with in college compared to some of the coaches I was with in the NFL, night and day difference. I take the guys at Alabama 10 times out of 10.
Jeremy Pettis says Bama has plenty of players in the Pro Bowl, and that's true because they just got a lot of players in the NFL. Yep. They're going to have a lot of Pro Bowlers, they're going to have a lot of busts, they're going to have a lot of everything in between because they are, you know, putting a lot of guys in the league. Really quick final point for me on this, and then we'll move on for something else. Don't you find it interesting that the hallmark of college football recruiting, that's how talent is acquired in the college game, it's all about how good all the players are. Every player's good. Even the 3-star guys are diamonds in the rough.
Yeah.
The NFL draft coverage is almost the exact opposite.
Yep.
Every player's a problem. Every play. Oh, he went to Alabama. There's no ceiling.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson's good in college, but too dumb to play in the NFL. Or whatever you want to do here. It's amazing to me how it's almost the exact opposite. The way the NFL draft analysts prove they're smart is to talk about how bad every college player is. And they can't all be bad, otherwise they wouldn't be going to the NFL.
I completely agree. And Teresa Stewart says, Mike, I bet you picked up and learned more. And before we get off this topic, I just want to make sure I cross this bridge. I 100% did. By the time I got in the NFL, I was 10 times a smarter player about the things that I needed to do personally. But it's about within a system, and it's about things that are asked you to do from coaches. And if that doesn't match up to what it was in college, you're not always going to get back to that level. So, yes, I was 10 times smarter, but the thing is, like, when the NFL season's over, you don't come back until like May. You know what I'm saying? You have to be smart enough, and you have to be enough of a self-motivator to where you're not going to have those brackets around yourself, and you have to make sure that you're getting the same football exposure you do back in college.
All right, let's do item number 6 here for a moment. And this couldn't be less important, but I do think this is kind of interesting. There was a piece up at the Auburn page at SECCountry.com about the, quote, Mount Rushmore of Auburn coaches, and you know, a guy like Shug Jordan's definitely going to be in there. He's one of the all-time greats. A guy like Pat Dye, who was the coach at Auburn during the 80s, he's going to be on there. And then there's some debate about like where Gus Malzahn's place in the conversation like this is. And when I'm reading this, the takeaway I have is, you can say right now that Malzahn is sort of less revered than Pat Dye. Maybe he is. Maybe less revered than Shug Jordan. Jordan won a national championship in 1957. That's something that, or at least I think he did. That's something that, that Gus Malzahn as a head coach hasn't done yet. But it did occur to me, when Malzahn's career is over, he's almost for sure thought of as greatest and most popular coach in Auburn history. That what Nick Saban's on his way to doing in Alabama, Gus Malzahn is on his way to doing his own version of that at Auburn. He's going to be thought of as the all-time greatest coach in Auburn history. And that's kind of an interesting thing to think, that we're living through the two best coaches, and I think that's what Malzahn will eventually be, the two best coaches in the Iron Bowl ever at schools at the same time.
It's tough. Like, first of all, I don't know if there's anybody that's not been in a good enough position to answer it like me. Like, I'm not very good on Auburn history. I just know that, listen, it's called Jordan-Hare Stadium and Pat Dye Field. And so I look at those two and I think that's obviously, that means something to the people at Auburn. Now, Gus Malzahn to me is a great coach. I think he's done great things. But to me, I look back to when I was in school at Tommy Tuberville, and I'm not sure there's that much air between Tommy Tuberville and Gus Malzahn for the bang for my buck. I mean, Tommy Tuberville was 85-40 when he left Auburn. Right now, Gus Malzahn's 45-22. And yes, he has the national title game appearance. Yes, he's been in the SEC championship a couple times. So was Tommy Tuberville. And Tommy Tuberville had an undefeated team back in 2004. And it just, to me, I think that Gus Malzahn's a very good coach, and I think he definitely belongs on that Mount Rushmore at Auburn, but I don't know how you slip past. I think it's very much Tommy Tuberville-esque. I think Tommy Tuberville is still beloved at Auburn. I don't know that Gus Malzahn surpassed him in my book yet, and Auburn fans can obviously correct me if I'm wrong.
So what I'm saying, though, is it's more about where it's going to be by the end. Tuberville does have the undefeated season in 2004. I think what we're getting at here is, and I think it's a weird position I get put in where I end up defending Malzahn more than I probably want to, because by all means, I'm not an Auburn fan in any shape, form, or fashion. But Malzahn, I believe, is building something far more consistent than a lot of people realize. And I don't really see any reason why it's going to slow down. Now, we've had some Arkansas fans weigh in. They don't like Malzahn, obviously, because of the way that he handled that contract deal going back in December. But that sort of does ensure that Malzahn's probably staying around Auburn for the long haul. And the odds are, my guess, he's going to keep winning. He's actually going to give Auburn what a lot of people assume that Auburn would not be able to have, which was a measure of consistency. Because remember, Tuberville goes undefeated in 2004, but he's fired shortly after that. Gene Chizik wins a national championship in 2010. He's fired shortly after that. Even Terry Bowden, who went undefeated in 93, I think, in a probation year, was also fired shortly after that. You know, Malzahn is going to end up being the guy that gets the chance to stick around for a while, and that level of continuity, that level of consistency, I think that Malzahn at the end of his career, you mentioned it's you said Jordan-Hare Stadium, is it Pat Dye Field? You got to name something after Gus Malzahn, because he's going to be the most consistent coach that Auburn's ever had.
Yeah, see, that's where I think we split. That's what I just mentioned Tommy Tuberville, and I think that's what I was trying to say. Tommy Tuberville was asked to leave at the end of his tenure. I am not going to sit up here in front of this camera right now and tell you with 100% fact that Gus Malzahn is going to be allowed to end on his own terms. I'm just not sure. I mean, fast forward back to last October before he pulled off those 2 games against Georgia and Alabama. All the talk was, boy, he hasn't been able to get over the hump against Georgia and Alabama in a couple of years. You know, it's been, you know, he's 0-6 in his last 6 games against Alabama and Georgia, and the 2 that he actually won were flukes before that. So he definitely proved something to me this year, and I think he proved something to a lot of Auburn fans. That's why he gets a huge pay raise. But if you're telling me to look 3 and 4 years in the future, but you know, Tommy Tuberville between 04 and 08, and you're going to ask me to explain to you that Gus Malzahn will be able to walk off in his own terms, I'm not ready to say that just yet. I think Gus Malzahn still has something left to prove.
Rick Keene says, BA, you call him consistent, but he loses 4 games a year. Go look at what some of the advanced stats writers have been saying, some of the guys that crunch the analytics numbers. I mean, you're going to see Auburn in pretty rarefied air when it comes to that kind of stuff. Recruiting numbers very much the same way. Jason Hoffer says, why was the AD at Auburn secretly calling head coaches last year and then inquiring about interest in Gus Malzahn's job? I think this is more about a panic induced by Nick Saban's success than it is an evaluation of Gus Malzahn's success.
Well, listen, that panic, I think, is what got Tommy Tuberville out of Auburn in the first place. I mean, you talk about, we ran the table in 2008, and Tommy Tuberville's walking into the stadium at the end of the year holding up 7 fingers, and then all of a sudden they get beat 36-0, and he's fired after the game. And that's kind of the way it was. It was almost like reactionary, like, hey, we got to change things up. Gene Chizik comes in, it's like the best thing ever, comes in, is able to win a national title, and then he's gone a year later. And so you got to think, I mean, Gene Chizik's a national title winning coach, and he's not even brought up in this conversation, Auburn. I'm just not ready to say that Malzahn, for everything that I think he proved to me last year, I'm not ready to say in 4 or 5 years he's still going to be there.
But isn't he 2-2 in his last 4 against Saban? That's an important stat.
That is an important stat. I think it's 2-3 in his last 5 against Saban.
So it'll be worth paying attention to here. We'll see how that plays out in the seasons ahead. For now, let's do item number 7 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. And we've been showing a lot of Dan Mullen really working hard at Florida to sell the program to students. He's playing dodgeball yesterday. He was speaking to some sorority houses not too long ago. And, of course, we're going to speak to the gals. Got to speak to the guys as well. I mean, we have some video here of Mullen doing just that. Speaking to some Florida frat houses here. Here is Mullen selling his program to some of the Florida students.
If we have an unbelievable game day environment, the players on the field play a little bit harder. Okay? Just because they get motivated. The same thing. Like if you go to a workout and it's just you in the gym and you're lifting, you've got to personally motivate yourself, right? Now, imagine I put like 85,000 people cheering you on, right? You're going to lift a little bit harder and push yourself a little bit more. That's the same type of attitude. So we start playing a little bit harder, we start to win. We also have all kinds of top recruits at every game. They walk into the swamp and they're like, hey, the student body's electric, the game is amazing, we're winning, it's crazy, I want to come to school here. Now we start getting better players. Okay, we get better players, we win more games. Okay? Then it's even easier for you to get more excited. Then you get louder and crazier. Players play harder, recruits like it even more, we get even better players. And then the cycle keeps going until we're the most dominant program in college football. And that's what the plan is. But y'all are such a critical part of us making that happen.
So what I noticed about that video is there are like 3 of the frat guys, at least 3, who are wearing tank tops. Now, if the coach is coming to your house, don't you got to put some sleeves on?
They're frat guys, man. They're frat guys. They don't care. Like they're the 19-year-old kids with somebody coming to their house.
I feel like there's nothing more stereotypical than like a bunch of Florida frat guys with a bunch of tank tops on.
Listen, I'm jealous of it. It's warm weather down there. Probably heading to the pool afterwards.
I mean,
probably got a nice round of beach volleyball about to go on outside.
If Mike Shule was coming to your house, who was Alabama coach at the time, would your mom let you have a tank top on?
Absolutely not. But that wasn't a frat house. That wasn't a frat house. Listen, I was never in a frat, but I got to tell you right now, I used to cuss those guys. When we'd be driving to practice, it's August, it's 110 degrees outside, and you're driving to practice, and those guys are out there throwing a Frisbee in the front yard of the frat house. They got the sprinkler system going, everybody in their bathing suit. I don't mind it at all, man. They're just living the dream down there.
I feel like the coach is coming to your house. You got to show a little. Can you put some sleeves on? Can you put a shirt with a collar on?
Maybe this is the fallback argument for me. I'm still not sure why he's there. I'm still not sure why he's there. And they probably feel the same way. They're like, what does he want to talk to us about? Like, is there something we can do? Does he need some walk-on kickers or something?
I guess Jim McElwain may have tarnished that image of Florida more than we realize in terms of. I mean, maybe the students are just sort of down on the program right now.
I think that, listen, I think every coach, because I thought about this yesterday after we talked about this topic, I think every coach to an extent has done something like this. Now, I've never seen it done like this, but this goes back to me. This is Kirby Smart's 93K day, the hashtag 93K. Yeah. This is what he's trying to do. He's trying to, build up that, listen, spring game comes around. We need to make sure everybody's excited. We need to fill it up. There's going to be recruits there. So I understand it to that extent. Now, I don't know if the right target is the frat houses, but if he's not doing anything else that day, hey, why not stop by? Why not play a little dodgeball?
Stephen Early says, if a coach came to my house and asked me to come to a game and get rowdy, I'd expect him to shotgun a natty light as a way to enter the brotherhood and get us to a 10. I mean, there is something to be said of when in Rome, you got to do as the Romans do. I mean, maybe Mullen should have partaken a little bit there.
He does kind of have a little. I've never seen Dan Mullen, like, obviously you see him on the sidelines, he's dressed up. He kind of has a like goofy little bounce to him where he's talking and he's kind of giving you this. Well, I kind of love it.
Bo Molinari mentioned the idea of sort of mixing the dodgeball with the frat house deal, where maybe we've seen he's pretty accurate with the dodgeball. Maybe he at the last minute he sort of pulls a couple out and starts whipping them at those Florida frat guys. That's a video.
And somebody throws a natty light at him and he spikes it with something and shotgun in the face. I'm all about it.
All right. Speaking of Arkansas, who we mentioned earlier, item number 8 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Razorback spring game is on Saturday, not on campus at Fayetteville, taking the game to War Memorial Stadium there at Little Rock, a place that some Arkansas fans aren't sure they like seeing games at, but does have a bit of a history and a tie-in there for the Hogs. So much so that Arkansas produced a video here, a former Arkansas tight end, Hunter Henry, describing what playing at Little Rock in the state capital, what that's like for he and his former Arkansas teammates. Here is Hunter Henry to get you fired up for Arkansas spring game.
Little Rock is cool. It's a unique atmosphere. It's kind of intimate, and it's a smaller feel, but it's cool that there's people from all over the state that are able to come. For me, it was awesome just because I got to play in front of my home, and where I'm from, and my family got to come out, and it was really easy for them to come out. So it's a special place, very intimate and very special.
So I got to tell you, I think this is a bizarre idea to play the spring game off campus. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think they should be playing any games at Little Rock. I think they should be playing their games in Fayetteville. I don't know why they are pushing this. I think the game needs to be in Fayetteville. Hunter Henry does his part to describe it being kind of a cool thing, but it doesn't sell me on the idea.
Yeah, he kind of at the end goes, it's special and it's unique and it's special. Like it's kind of that's kind of how I feel about the whole thing, kind of talking in circles. Here's what I will say. Here's what I'll give Chad Morris credit for, or whoever it was that pulled the string on this. Status quo has not been working at Arkansas. Status quo, doing things like you've always been doing them, doing on campus, whatever has been done for the last 10, 20 years, has not been working at Arkansas. Arkansas hasn't been a great team in 10 years. And so if changing it up and getting to somewhere else in the state allows more recruits to get there, allows more fans to get there, allows more boosters to get there, makes it a better atmosphere, makes it some type of sellout because these fans can't get to Fayetteville, I'm all about it, man. If you have to throw some kind of change up in there to get some kind of excitement level raised back up for an Arkansas team that we're not so sure is going to be in the top 13 next year in the SEC, then do what you got to do. If moving it to Little Rock it's that special of a place and that's what sells out the game, then I am all about it. I think it's important and year one for head coaches these days to make sure they pack out these spring games. If that's what it takes for Chad Morris to pack out this Arkansas spring game, by all means, I am all in favor of it.
Dwayne Work says when I was in college there were 3 to 4 games at Little Rock. But I think, Alabama used to also play a lot of games at Legion Field. Used to play the majority of its games in Legion Field. But what you find over time is, and this is pretty well consistently true, is like on campus is just going to be a better draw. I mean, Bo Molinari says that the Little Rock population is greater than the Fayetteville population, but Fayetteville's on campus. You're talking about filling the stadium with like 30,000 students, at least you hope to. I mean, that's where your really crowd and your really energy comes from. It's the students who are not driving 2 hours to Little Rock to go to a game.
No, I tend to agree with you, but I think Dwayne Work says it best here when he says if you were from here, you would understand, because I don't think this is something you can just put a piece of tape over and it's true everywhere. I think it's a situation by situation deal. I mean, listen, when's the last time UCLA played on-campus games? They've been playing the Rose Bowl forever, and they
that's California.
They just now started bringing it back on campus, like last year, to play their spring games on campus.
So, but that's California. You can't compare the weirdness of college football in California to the normalness of the SEC. And as far as not being from Arkansas, hell, it's the people from Arkansas who are complaining about this.
This is what I'm saying. Is like
at least half of them anyway.
You can't compare Arkansas to Florida. I mean, it's just different. You can't say these things are all the same at every university. Fayetteville is tucked up in the corner of the state. Little Rock's right in the middle of it. There's a ton more population there, and there's a ton of fans. So I don't know that this is the answer. My point in saying this is if something different about what Chad Morris is doing, because whatever they have been doing has not been working.
Item number 9 here on our SEC Country Line First and 10 list. Andy Staples, who covers college football for SI.com, came up with his list of college football players moving on to the NFL who he thinks has a chance to be draft sleepers, and a couple names from the SEC show up on this list. You've got Christian Kirk, the Texas A&M wide receiver, also kick returner, Kerryon Johnson, the Auburn running back, and DJ Chark, the former LSU receiver. Do one of those 3 names for you sort of work out as your biggest SEC sleeper in the NFL draft?
Yeah, I mean, I like all three of these guys. I think when you talk about Christian Kirk's skill set, I think DJ Chark's skill set, but I am going to go with Kerryon Johnson because I think he makes a great point in his assessment of Kerryon Johnson. There were two games, Bama at Auburn and Georgia at Auburn this year, when Kerryon Johnson looked like the best player on the field with a field full of draft picks, especially defensive draft picks. And so when Kerryon Johnson can take over a game like that, now I'm not saying, and we've talked up and down about Kerryon Johnson and his draft prospects, what he's going to be in the NFL. I think he's going to be a good player. Can he stay healthy is kind of its own kind of talk with that. But Kerryon Johnson, when you talk about the way he was able to take over games at times, I love what Christian Kirk was. I love what DJ Chark was. But Kerryon Johnson, to me, was just one level above other players in certain games this year.
Real quick, to go back to the other topic for a moment about the Arkansas spring game, Jody Margrave Barber brings up a good point. That the stadium's under construction, so that's one of the reasons too why having it in Little Rock sort of makes some sense because they are renovating that.
Right, but it goes back to the talk we've always. They could play the game there if they wanted to. It's not, I think the stadium's under construction.
Yeah, Georgia Stadium's under construction.
Yeah, I mean Bama Stadium's under construction. They don't move these games all the time, so they can play it there. But it goes back to the talk that we've been having a bunch about. Should they play any home games in Little Rock? We've had that talk a ton.
Yeah, but back to the other topic, the topic at hand for the moment. In terms of SEC sleepers in the NFL draft, I mean, I want to say Christian Kirk. That's the guy that I think could be the most dynamic because he obviously brings the extra dimension of the kick return game to the table. But how nervous are you if you're Kirk right now and all these sort of media stories, scuttlebutt in the NFL about the kicking game being completely taken out of the NFL? That's a guy that could literally, I don't want to be over dramatic here, but he could literally go from being a very high-paid, very important member of an NFL team to not in the league at all if kick returns and punt returns are taken out of it. Because, I mean, listen, he may be a good receiver, but a big portion of his value is what he does as a special teams player. If there is no special teams, a guy like that may be teaching PE.
It's the same thing for DJ Chark for me. I mean, you're talking about guys that, listen, and I'm not saying these guys aren't going to be good in the NFL because I do believe in both of those guys as wide receivers. But there is an element where you say, boy, are they 2 rounds later if there's no kicking game?
Yeah.
I mean, do they slide in the draft? Can we find a different guy in there? And honestly, that's a little bit of what Kerryon Johnson's kind of dealing with right now because it's such a deep running back class. So you can get a Kerryon Johnson type of guy deeper in the draft and not have to pay as much money, not have to worry about durability issues. So there is that. But you're right. I mean, you do have to take a deep breath or something. Like I played with Devin Hester. Devin Hester doesn't have a career if it's not for his return ability.
That's a borderline Pro Football Hall of Famer out of Miami, Chicago, Atlanta, a lot of places like that. That's a guy that's not in the league if there's no special teams.
Right, and this is a guy who, you never see this, this guy changed positions when he was in the NFL. He was a corner, and he changes to wide receiver because he's such a good return man and allow him the ability to do that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to pay attention to. Pretty interesting list there from Andy Staples, SI.com. All right, item number 10 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. You're going to be mad at me for bringing this up, but I got to tell you, I could not help but notice this. There's a certain word that your buddy Lane Kiffin uses that got my attention. Andrew Astleford, who is a good reporter for us here at SECCountry.com, caught up with the FAU coach about a number of subjects. One of the ones that came up was how Mike Locksley was going to do as the brand new offensive coordinator at Alabama. And in the midst of trying to give Locksley a compliment, Kiffin sort of slips in something that, I don't know, could maybe almost be an attempt to stir the pot at Alabama. Here is Kiffin quoted by Andrew Astleford at SECCountry.com about the Mike Locksley hire as offensive coordinator, talking about 2017. He says, Coach Saban went outside. They hired an NFL guy to come back to college. Obviously referencing Brian Dable. It's always a gamble that over time has not worked a whole lot 100%. These offensive coordinators go from the NFL without a college background to college. It's like 2 different sports. So here's what he says about Mike Locksley. So I was kind of surprised he was overlooked. So is this a situation where instead of giving Mike Locksley credit for earning the offensive coordinator job for this year, Lane Kiffin's saying, yeah, but why did you overlook him last year? Do you understand the sort of negative tone that word overlooked seems to take in a conversation like this?
I actually do. I actually do understand it. And listen, you guys know I love my alma mater, and you know I love Nick Saban. But I'm almost tending to agree with Lane Kiffin on this one. I think that when you look at the Brian Dable hire, he's there for 1 year. I'm not sure he had the recruiting prowess that Michael Locksley did. If Michael Locksley was good enough to get it this year, then I'm not so sure he shouldn't have been good enough to get it a year ago. I think a lot of it goes back to recruiting. We talked about the relationships he had already built up this year. We kind of made him a slam dunk hire this year. But Michael Locksley was a college coach. Brian Dable was not. And I think Lane Kiffin is just pointing that out and saying, listen, this guy was a recruiter. This guy has been able to get people. He's been around the college game. You go out and bring in Brian Dable, who's just worked with Rob Gronkowski. That's a pretty easy job up there in New England. All of a sudden, he's not used to recruiting. He's got 6 kids, got a pregnant wife, and he's out of college football in 1 year. So as much as it would pain me, I look at Lane Kiffin and I kind of understand his comments there, because I'm not so sure what steered them away from Michael Locksley from the get-go. You wonder some of those recruits they missed out on. Is there a little bit of hindsight right there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I also think with Dan Enos being on the staff now, I think you're being shown here, and this is completely unfair, but I think you're being shown here that it's not completely 100% Mike Locksley's show. Enos was a very good offensive coordinator at Arkansas. He was a former head coach at Central Michigan. Now Locksley's got head coaching experience himself, but he probably doesn't want to bring up that portion of his resume. I don't think this is fully Locksley's show. I don't mind telling you that.
No, I don't think so. Listen, we talk about brackets on players. Nick Saban putting brackets on players in college football. He's got training wheels now. I mean, there is no doubt about that. They have got so many offensive minds in that meeting room right now that this is not going to be a one-man game plan. It's not even going to 2. There's going to be like 4 people coming up with the game plan. So I agree. I feel like you could have. Chris Winkie was on staff.
Yeah.
Dan Werner. I mean, you could have had this a year ago with Michael Locksley if that was an option.
Yeah, but nobody knows how to turn that phrase quite like Kiffin. Overlooked last year, always finding a way to sort of stir things up.
He does.
Here on SEC Country Live, we're always looking to close the show the same way every day. We're always on the lookout for champions of life. And today we find one from the ranks of the NFL. A lot of guys going through off-season conditioning and training this time of year, but maybe no one doing it quite like LA Rams superstar Aaron Donald is, a big-time sack producer who maybe got that way because of work with not just a personal coach, but cutlery as well. Take a look at Aaron Donald with some knives here. Mike, you were an NFL player. You went up against guys like Aaron Donald all the time. Does it make sense? Like, why is he doing this with the knives?
I have so many questions about this. Like this, I understand what you're doing, and it like gets you better, and it's like, boy, I'm in danger here. I don't want to get my arms cut or whatever it is. First of all, these got to be plastic knives, right? I mean, there's no way these are like sharp
This looks
knives.
like a self-defense class that like the local sheriff's department does with some gals.
This is so ridiculous to me. Like, I don't understand why exactly they're doing this. And listen, they're in
Makes for great video.
They're at Pittsburgh. They're doing this. It makes for a great video, but there are so many other ways to get technique done without somebody swinging a knife at me.
So here's the thing I got to wonder. This is the Pittsburgh Steelers official complex. I got to imagine that knives are not allowed in the building. Like, how'd they even get them in the building?
I don't know. They got to be plastic. That's what I was saying from the top. They've got to be plastic knives.
It's like the thing you had when you were a kid, like when you stab somebody with it and like it sort of disappears into the handle. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, either that or it's like the clear one that looks like it has blood on it, but the blood's inside of it, kind of rushing from one side of it, like a haunted house kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a pretty bizarre thing to see. All right, thanks for being with us here today on SEC Country Live. Make sure you check out the audio version of our show. Podcast will be up for you on Apple Podcasts, Android devices, SoundCloud. Also, share the show with your friends on Facebook. Let them know that we're talking about the SEC here every afternoon on SEC Country Live. We'll also see you again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for another episode of SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day.